Okay. Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode. Hopefully my voice is loud and clear. Today's episode is The Winds of Evolution. It's an important episode. It's one of the most important ideas that has entered my mind in this lifetime. And so I think it was fitting that it's 111. We do The Winds of Evolution. You see, all ideas, just like objects, they have a moment of engagement. For example, when you look at an object and the moment you want to interact with that object, you touch it. And you can say, when it comes to knowledge, knowledge is how your mind touches a subject. And in some sense, how it's even introduced to it. The winds of evolution is a concept. It's pretty much where we are left with in modern society, especially after Friedrich Nietzsche. Especially after Friedrich Nietzsche declared that God is dead and man killed him. When God died, that means the ability or the authorization of the human mind to let itself personify its whole moment was in some sense denied. So in other words, man killed his imagination upon the intelligence of the whole world and the whole moment, pretty much. You know, I have looked at secular societies and religious societies for a while. And I've wondered, for how long will the language wars echo? For how long will human beings fight for eyes that only they see through? You know, I learned a lot from Sun Tzu's Art of War. And in the Art of War, he has a saying where he's saying, like, in some sense, the great warrior defeats the opponent without, in some sense, raising his weapon. And so certain challenges and certain problems that will, require the confrontation of the whole species of the whole problem. These situations, we got to kind of look at them and see how can we win without fighting it. Because anytime a person fights, it takes energy. It takes something away. You cannot physically hit a person without your hand feeling something. So anytime there is violence and intensity, this plane of existence is designed to echo back. That means if you're sitting in an airplane and you're being piloted by the cosmos, in some sense, if you behave strange, suddenly you see like the stewardesses of the plane are like, "Sir, what's the problem? What's the problem?" So in some sense, the purpose of human life is not just activity, it is abidance by a collective process. And that's what we need to really figure out. And so the winds of evolution, it started off, usually when I share these ideas that I share in these talks, they are ideas that I have looked a couple times at from different angles. Okay guys, my attention came on the chat. Dennis says there's a lot of echo, so I don't know guys, I'm using the same setup I'm using every day. My voice is a bit different today though, I don't know if it's the echo. Anyways, hopefully it's workable, good enough. Anyways guys, the winds of evolution. So the way I will introduce this idea to you is that imagine not human beings first, imagine fish. Let's imagine fish together. There's this story here, I'll share it like this. There's this story, in this story, these younger educated fish, they go to this older sage of a fish. They go to this older fish and they're like, older fish, tell us, what is God? You know, what is God? Tell us, older fish. And they're like, we think it's a bigger fish. The fish come to the sage of a fish. Let's call it sage fish. There should probably be a sage fish. Welcome and good morning, folks. Anybody who's new to the chat. Pretty much, these younger fish go to this older fish and they're like, older fish, what's God? Tell us what's God. And God to them is the ocean. But the ocean is like air to the fish, so they can't technically see it. They don't consider it. It's like the same way the fish are considering the ocean. Similarly, the fish are considering the ocean. At the same time, it's like as human beings consider air, it's as if it's not there, it's space. So to fish, water could be space. The older fish says, no, God is not an old, bigger fish. Don't go searching the bigger fish. God is everywhere, within everything. Its currents move us and whatnot. And the fish is trying to tell these younger fish, you know? And the younger fish don't listen. They're like, are you kidding me, man? You're telling me God is everywhere? No, God has to be an archetype of my mind. God has to be there. I'm going to go find God. You know, and like the esoteric societies, the younger fish didn't listen, and the younger fish go eventually they find a shark, something unfathomable to their mind, and they think the shark is the god, but the shark eats them, you know. So now this idea that imagine the human being is a fish in the ocean, and Mr. Within is talking to you about the winds of evolution. Those winds of evolution, those rhythms that are the epitome of our dynamic knowledge, those are the currents the fish in the water find, and it gives them momentum. So what that means is, if human beings were seen like fish, in some sense, sometimes the fish might find itself in a current and be like, oh my God, how am I doing this? But it's a current. Now, the winds of evolution is different in the sense that I'm saying there's intelligent currents. Now, they may appear intelligent to us, but it doesn't mean in higher dimensions they have intelligence. What that means is when we look in regards to the viewpoint of the fish, that fish suddenly swimming and finding itself in a current is suddenly swimming much faster than its belief system. And the fish can't even see the current, so it feels it's just swimming faster. It identifies, it relates the ability of the moment to itself. That's a discretion that is required in your inner realms, knowing what is you and knowing what is not you. That is very crucial. Because most people, because they think they're a thought, when they go into their inner realms and when the unconscious happens, it immediately turns into a thought for them. So technically, some people who think they're communicating to interdimensional beings are technically communicating to how their mind is an unconscious, is a different form than how their conscious mind perceives. So the winds of evolution, There are currents, there are intelligent currents, and they're happening on the surface of this earth, I'm telling you. And as a species, we're waking up to them. Every rock star, every violinist, it's also where the mystery of sound and light find themselves. That means, imagine in the future we find someone. You can find, like, in the future, there's going to be the Mozart, there's going to be the Beethoven of light. Maybe there's going to be the orchestrators, composers, where they're not composing per se sound, they're composing different sequencing of holographic light or something. You know, anything that is alive, it tends to evolve you. Anything that isn't alive, it tends to make you reflect. And then there's an inner evolution. Anytime in my life I've went forward to do some task, and when that task has been unauthorized, whether I didn't feel I could do it, or whether something else felt I couldn't do it, or whatever it was, eventually after some point one will be left with the presence of their eyes. That means the most important thing, Mr. Within would say, for a human being to do on this planet is to become comfortable with the being part first, then the human. We are saying we are human beings. The human relates to the objective form, and it also relates to how the objective form has led to the subjective. Yes, guys, but you see, our civilization is obsessed with the ego, and that's language worship. I am speaking to those in the era of advanced communication. That means back in the day when people wanted to find truth, it would eventually be cornered in each of their inner realms. So if me and whoever, let's say person A, whoever it is in the world, and person B, whoever it is in the world, if they were to speak, if they did not choose to have a flexibility beyond their own sight, they would in some sense be there would be ethnocentrism to the degree that every person's eyes is speaking for itself, so how can two people have the same truth? It's the advantage, it's the ability of the advanced communicator to be, for the first time, realize it's okay for there to be multidimensionality. It hasn't been okay. Anytime it's not okay for there to be multidimensionality, people fight over the truth of the dimension, and it's savage. That's what war was, really. War, you can say war began in the minds of man before people picked up weapons. And how did it begin? Because two beings came to the same value, and it was pretty much who took it first. That means, I don't know how many people realize this, but our history and a lot of wars was because groups of people, different tribes, came to the same resources, and they were like, all right, it's mine. And the other one was like, no, it's mine. And then 50 million people died in World War II, or more. So you see, it's that situation where the mind is designed strangely to not just be an object that subjectifies itself, but to also be a subject that subjectifies objects. That means your interaction with the manifest physical realm is in some sense a subjectification process on a subtle level. That means truth, when two people start off with their own inner realms, has to be a co-creation, or it can't be true. So that means there has to be a leniency, some sort of, as Bertrand Russell says, moral charity and tolerance for every person in their inner realm to, in some sense, reduce a little bit the volume of their inner realm. You don't have to forget who you are, you just have to be able to see more than who you are in the moment. So anyways, these winds of evolution, you see, anytime a person says something new, we can't ascribe it. Alan Watts set down the problem of the ego to rest. Alan Watts gave a description of the ego where it was the way I was seeing before, because so many people are given different interpretations. You might not believe it. There's certain denominations in yoga where they feel the ego is God. They feel the ego is God. It's the only thing that's there to be a shape to do something. So there is that viewpoint. But for me, it's this idea where it's not about what language we identify with anymore. It's about experientially perceiving what is really going on in this plane of existence. Because your ethnocentrism doesn't really help you. Do you know? That means I noticed something very early on, and I say this is the war of language, how I've been fighting language my whole life. I'm kind of in a love and hate relationship with it. When I use language like a technology, it's like, you know, why would Tony Stark complain about the Iron Man suit? But when Tony Stark thinks he's the Iron Man suit, that's messed up. That's I would say pure egotism, where the attention is identifying with its shape before realizing it's an attention to shape. Attention to form is the ego, by the way. Any attention to a form of self is the ego. That means you can't be an individual without an ego. The moment you speak, those words are declared out of an individualism. Unless you are the logos whispering in people's ears where you're disembodied. So in that case, you're nothing. You know, it's like they told the sage he's nothing. You know, somebody came up to the sage and the yogi and said, "You're nothing, man." You know, and the sage was like, "Exactly." Anyways, guys, I'm going to get back to this winds of evolution idea. The winds of evolution idea is the fact that I feel there's intelligent currents on the surface of this world. I feel we're multidimensional beings. I feel there's an objective realm which appears in particles, and then I feel there's a subjective realm, which is how the subject is moving in a field of witnessing. This field of attention observance is the core of the human being, because it is that before the identity and before the ideology. There is something of you as you, and that is still your attention, which is primordial. It is not primordial to the sense of the origin of the universe before manifestation. It is primordial in the sense that it is before the beginning of your world. That's why the word primordial, it's a very, very, very majestic word. That means anytime I wondered about myself before it was shaped, I realize I am the attention before the mover of the shape. And when you come to that, when your mind finds an acceptance of its own being, regardless of the condition of the image or the shape or the language, then you, in some sense, become an unchained titan, and what conducts your ability and skill is your mind as a field, not as a body. I'm not speaking to you right now as a thought, even though that's the only way it can come across, but I'm deep down, there is activity that is irrelevant to character. That means literally there are states of being where there is no character and setting. There's your presence. And most likely, of course nobody knows what happens after death, but most likely I feel you're going to come to a pure awareness of that presence. You know what that means? That means the watcher of worlds will be witnessed when worlds break. That witness is the mover. You might be thinking right now your body is moving itself, but it is the mind. It is a field of intelligence, just like how you can plant a seed. Imagine in advanced dimensions of being, it's not just a seed you can plant a field of activity. That means the world is the seed. And what's beyond the world is the fruit. So anyways, just like those fish, imagine you're a fish, and let's call it Fishville. You know, you're a fish in Fishville, or Oceanville, or whatever you like to. You know? And so you're going by your day, you're like, I'm just a regular fish. You know, I'm just another fish in the sea. And then a current hits you. And the current could be moving you against where you're going, or in some sense, it's like, do you think the wind that hits you in the park when you're walking cares about your life purpose? I'm saying there are many activities that they are unconscious when they happen. For example, a forest fire, the fire doesn't have a sort of consciousness, even though this is if you were a yogi from like Vedic times, you would debate this with me, and I would give you a stance, but it would be a situation where I'm saying certain things don't have minds. The whole point of having a mind is the organization and administration that comes with it, but you can only, you need, like technically 50% of the moment you can administer. You can administer and organize what you know. What you don't know, can you do something about? Right now, if I don't know, like, there's a fire happening somewhere in the world, how can I assist it? How can I help it? So human beings, in this life, you may be a person where this is Mr. Within's view. This is like one person in a universe of a billion trillion stars is suggesting this, And before hearing anyone else's voice, give yourself a chance to hear your own voice. I always say this. That means there was a time where the voice of others was more important to me than my voice, and that was because the world had made me feel like my voice doesn't exist or it's unneeded. It was nature. I will tell you, my call, what drove me to caring for this world that I'm temporarily in. It was not man's voice. It was the voice of events where there are echoes you feel. Guys, I have this thing. I mean, every person has their own idiosyncrasies because the personality is sculpted in accordance to the DNA and the ecosystems that individual is shaped in. You see, it's not your parents that just spoon feed you. The world is spoon feeding you information every moment you open your eyes. That is the divine access. There is something that every day I strangely find myself having a still moment. It's just a moment where I'm just it could be in the middle of an activity, it could be anywhere. It's just one moment throughout the day where there's a stillness and I feel the grand happening. I feel the activity that is happening. And so we go see so many sages. They said, unless you fix the individual, you cannot fix the civilization. But then I realized the individual is getting its values from the civilization. This was the point that Slavoj Žižek, this sort of unique Marxist, was in some sense making against Jordan Peterson's viewpoint. It was like they were having a debate. And Jordan Peterson, of course, he's this revolutionary thinker. Like, I can't tell you, Jordan Peterson has made people care for history. You see, guys, the scholars are fighting for stage time as well. It is not just the entertainers. Entertainment can go so far. Then after some point in that artificial matrix, in that simulation of subjectivity, there will come questions that are being asked of the objective realm. That means, right now, if you truly ask yourself, where did existence start from? You will see it is unknown. It is unknown. Think of how many people you walk past by through the day where you just see their appearance and their psychology, who they are, the road they're living is unknown. For me, civilization, after a while, it started appearing like I could totally see matrix codes. And what were those matrix codes? Those matrix codes are language, and those matrix codes program ethics, and they program morality, and they program what is right and wrong. Language is driving the civilization's mind, but matter is moving it. It's moving in space. So you see, the free will is like matter moving itself in space, where we are realizing we can't give this intelligence just to the matter. That eventually science will realize it pulled the curtains too soon on what else the world could be. So this point that Jordan Peterson was making was that Jordan Peterson had this mentality where he's like, we gotta help the individual, and when the individual is helped, then we can help the collective. And Slavoj Žižek, he went a bit savage, like that's his style. If you hear Slavoj Žižek's talks, yeah. Slavoj Žižek was telling Mr. Peterson, as if he's saying, Mr. Jordan Peterson, you're telling people to clean their room. For example, start from the inner realms, from your individual realms where you have control to do something about. That means if you're a person who can't, for example, in some sense, let's say, if you can't, here's the thing, it's like you start off, most people are starting off with the impossible. They're running after the impossible. So, Savo in the chat section, give me a second. I'm going to finish the story and I'll respond to your comments because they're interesting. They're relevant too. Here's the thing, guys. Slavoj Žižek was saying, can you tell a person in North Korea who's starving and lost in some intense ideological system, can you tell that starving person to clean their room? Can you tell that child in the African poverty commercial who is skin and bone and has just enough strength to raise his hands to the world before it closes its eyes? Like there is an intensity going on where it's not just an individual effort, because the collective system is under some model. That means whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, probably at some point the human being's like, wait a minute, is this world a system? And bam! When the being begins to see a system, that means the being decides to watch the system and let the system explain its values. It's kind of like when you're with a human being, if you assume you know them, you can't be with that person. This is strangely a true thing, guys. Because it's kind of like especially in courtship, in modern courtship, it's like the style of character introduced has to be maintained until deeper dimensions can be accepted. But that there is an artificialness. Do you know right now, because every person has a different sort of ethnocentrism, different upbringing and conditioning, every person is like their own world, their own system, right? So when two systems come together, it takes a while. That means it was like, there was this saying where they said it takes a lifetime to get to know a person. And in that mindset, you're like, oh, okay, marriage makes sense. I need to take a lifetime to get to know who a being is, because people are growing with the dimensions of their world. So anyways, that was the point. It's not just the individual system that has to evolve, the collective system has to evolve, because the collective system is also the input of the individual. So Savo in the chat section says, how I find Jordan Peterson. I was watching for fun some video about broken matrix and matricity, and saying Jordan Peterson is an error in a matrix system. Yeah. You see, anytime you become conscious of the direction of the status quo, you instantly become conscious of the directions not being taken. A person cannot look at one technology and not have their mind fathom the other, the opposite. It's like, I can imagine in some sense, I'm looking at this cup, okay guys? I'm looking at this cup, and I'm seeing that this cup is made of like ceramic and there's like coffee inside. Now my mind instantly can visualize a technology in the future where the cup is made of liquid and what's inside it is like mass. My mind, the moment it sees the design, the dualistic mind gives itself multiple levels of access. So most people feel they don't know and they're in an unknown world. But I am telling you, you will realize one day that what is separating the conscious and the unconscious is what language is imposed in the void before space has a chance to breathe first. The wings of evolution is how human beings are wandering beyond the dimensions of their perception, their relationship with their world. You see, a relationship with nature and the world is, for example, like the Gladiator movie. The guy, before going into war, would take dirt and he would kind of, in some sense, he would touch the earth. He would acknowledge the fact that he could go to zero. He could return to the earth. When he found a contentment with dirt, how life can dismantle as much as it can, as much as it can have a constructive direction, it can have a destructive direction. Do you know, in this lifetime of mine, how many times I've seen situations where, regardless of the person's intellect, something else has moved the outcome of the moment of the person? And whether that we give that to some sort of unknown, divine, I can't say it, untranslatable. All right, I gotta slow down here. Uninterpretable. There we go. People don't realize that their belief, their action of belief is art. You see, it's a weird context, you know. The religious ideal mindset is like let go, surrender, and everything is moved by the mind and the will of this universal presence of, aka God. And so, in the other view, it's as if there is no God, but there is intelligence. You see, God was the 6th century attempt to personify the world. Now, this doesn't mean it's wrong or it doesn't mean it's right. It just means it was an expression. When you really look at the history of human evolution, just a history of human beings, okay? They're like we're on a rock in the middle of nowhere and human beings started popping up. You see, the issue is we don't want to believe or disbelieve. We want to directly access experientially. The value of experience is heavens beyond the value of belief. Now, granted, some things the person can't see to believe. Like right now, somebody could come, imagine a time where people didn't know there's brains inside their head. You know, they were just creatures, you know? So imagine a time traveler coming to them and being like, there's a brain inside your head. You know, you're inside your body, there's a skeleton. The person would be like, I don't see a brain, I don't see a skeleton, I don't believe this, nonsense. But only through different dimensions of perception we find the validity. So it is true that when we look at the human body, regardless of if you think there was a creator to this or if it was just if you feel it had an intelligent cause or non-intelligent cause, regardless of your perspective. You know, for me, those are language games with the world. The reality of life is purely experiential. That experience it transcends even the human idea. That means there's going to come a time in the future where philosophers are going to be like, okay, we can't categorize this action as human, and we can't categorize it as non-human. What do we do? And that's the novelty of the unknown. That sometimes when you can't find truth, maybe you're it. Maybe you're the step that you're waiting for. You know, not all teachings are external. Not all of life is to be drawn to the external realms. You know, it's all about how aware you choose to be. That means if Thor didn't want to pick up the hammer, there would be no hammer in his hand. And I think few people know this about Nordic mythology, but Thor's hammer was actually a gift from Loki, his brother. His brother who was in some sense the archetype of mischief. And pretty much Loki does something wrong, and to repay the wrong he has done, in some sense he goes to these dwarves, these celestial dwarves, and in some sense sets up a game between two dwarf blacksmiths. And in some sense, he gets himself into a karmic loop inevitably. But those dwarves make three, if I remember correctly, they make three gifts for the gods. They make the hammer of Thor. They make the hair for, I think it was the wife of Odin. And then they make a spear for Odin. These were the three divine gifts. And the hammer of Thor was a gift where, if you like check the legend, the hammer of Thor, it comes to its owner. The hammer is conscious. The hammer is like this advanced technology that is aware of its user. You see, most technologies are not aware of their user. Right now, we're driving cars that are not aware of their user. What that means is if the person is in the car and they shout, the car doesn't hear their voice. The car is just an object. The whole point of intelligence is where the objective is given more opportunities, is given more space. So one thing a person can see the ancients, they walked in a world where gods were walking there too. They were not alone. In their inner realms, the ancients were not alone. You go find so many patterns of this in history. The ancient Greeks acknowledged the logos, the inner guiding voice. Socrates acknowledged the inner oracle. I think, what was his name? Friedrich Nietzsche acknowledged a legit demon, for example, talking to him. Plato acknowledged the daemon. Do you know? And the Native American shamans, it was the spirit of nature speaking to them. It was the Gaian mind. So you see, human beings have not just had relationships with objects in their life. They have had relationship with subjects, which has been the process and the activity of the object. And that's why you see when the Buddha was born at a time where it was Brahmanism. What that means is there was a lot of ritual practice towards reaching the state of the gods. People were looking for truth, but they were looking through it from their own self-conceived rituals. Right now, if we were to look at it, technically a person saying my inner realms are God, that person is literally saying that you can say your inner realms is a ritual of your subjective body. That means back in the day, the shaman, for example, threw some stuff on the fire and danced and in some sense evoked the spirit into the moment, an animate force, do you know? But nowadays we have disconnected ourselves with that animate force and have kept it alive and accessible in our subconscious. So at most, people will feel something unique about their moment if they get like a unique dream or they get an intense experience in the atmospheres of semi-consciousness. All those people who suddenly like they survive a life-threatening experience or a near-death experience or whatever, their mind, their attention gets shifted out of their normalcy. Eventually, after some point, you're going to realize either world moves first or man moves. And we as human beings are here, so man moves first. The world is waiting for man to make his chess move. The human species to make its chess move. And its next chess move is in some sense no longer resisting the war. That means imagine an army. There was this king. I'm going to create this story here, guys. This is going to be epic enough to go into my science fiction novels. But I'm going to probably design it. But I'm going to create this story, guys. So check it out. There was this king. This king became, through chaos and wrath, the most powerful king of the land. Of the world. He became an emperor. His armies were undefeated. His armies, the moment they would step by kingdoms would automatically just surrender. And this ruthless king, he lived as a ruthless king, and eventually he got conquered by time. That means the man got old and he never got defeated and he died. It was like a being that had come into this world just to experience victories. Ignorant and oblivious of the wrath and the cruelty, this emperor became the most powerful emperor. But this emperor had a son. And in some sense, he had an older son and a younger son. And let's say a third son. The third son is too young. Let's say the younger son, the middle kid is in some sense, let's say 12. And we're going to say the oldest son was 20. And so let's say the emperor, before he dies, he's like 50 or something. Now this emperor, in some sense, he calls his oldest son and he's like, son, before I die, let's say the emperor. The emperor says, I'm gonna teach you how to be a conqueror. And the oldest son is like, okay. The oldest son goes and eventually sees that what his father is doing, he thinks is power, is destruction. It is occupying the minds of people, occupying the lives of people. So the oldest son, in some sense, begins rebelling, and the wrath of the father finds the oldest son. The wrath of the emperor, and the wrath of the emperor, in some sense, imagine you're a king. You're in the king's council as some person. Let's say me and you are just townspeople and we're there watching a king, and nobody has the courage to speak to the king other than the king's son. And so we see the king's son, because the king can't kill his own son, the king's son has a strange authority of speech to the ears of the king. And the king's son, the oldest son, says, Father, you're in some sense breaking the world, stop this madness. And they go into war. And so the king, in some sense, sends his son away. He doesn't dismiss his authority. He lets his son still be, a king of a royalty of the empire, but he sends his oldest son away. So in some sense, the father doesn't hear the oldest voice of the son, doesn't hear the voice of the oldest son. Then there is the second son, and the second son has not seen what the father has shown, but has seen the eyes and the psychology of the oldest son. So the second son is living now stronger. Living stronger than, is trying to go with the will of the older brother than the father. Pretty much, I'm gonna give the story to an ending, but it can stretch out more. Pretty much, the youngest son overwhelms all four of them, all three of them. But anyways, pretty much I wanted to share this idea. This emperor king, in some sense, he passes away and his sons are left to rule the empire, and his sons have seen the cruelty of their father, so in some sense they are never again shall this chaos walk this earth. And so back in the day, if you were a kingdom and you were sieged by this army, you would be scared. But these kings, these sons that came in after the king, they in some sense declared the ultimate service. So what that means is, this is the cool thing I think that's never been seen on TV and maybe in writing, in literature, is that an army attacking another army, but they are not attacking to defeat, they are attacking to help. And so armies of resources start moving out through the empire, and all kingdoms rise, Because it's the lineage of kings, guys. Like, there's something that kings saw in their psychology, that if royalty dies, the king never existed. And what that means is, if any moment people forget history, they forget the eyes that have carried them so far. Like, I'm a bit old school. For me, the concept of the archetype of the king is not so easily dismissed by our modern interpretations of it. It was the archetype of the ultimatum of man's effort upon his environment. So if you just take it as a metaphor, it's even mind-blowing archetype. But anyways, what I'm saying is, the opposite can be seen. The opposite will be seen. Jordan Peterson had a choice to speak or to remain in the silence. And do you know how many human beings remain silent, overwhelmed by the direction of the status quo? And there are some who look at the status quo and they're like, oh my God, the status quo even doesn't see the status quo. That means the captain of the ship is too drunk to know what it's doing. So when it's that point, that's when the serious mind finds you. So I've had moments where I've been super silly and playful, literally. Literally, it's like I felt like space. When I feel like space, I tend to feel silly, you know? What I mean by that is that language is, I'm playful with language. But when something is crucial about how the matter needs to be sequenced in the physical moment, then that's when a sort of seriousness is required. But this seriousness is not with a connotation of a negative urge. This seriousness is concentration. And I'm telling you, if you as a human being understand the value of concentration, you will understand its implication is endless endurance of attention. That means the mind is the mystery and we're being it. We are being the mystery of our own lives as much as we're being what's revealed of it. Your eyes harbor an ancient sacredness. Not just that you're made atomically of stardust, but on some level, you are stardust aware of itself. That is a higher caliber. That's like that's like the tears of dying stars, of a dying star being like these shadows cast in other parallel dimensions, yeah. Jordan Peterson, for me, he does something incredible when you see him speak. After some point, you guys, anytime a person is speaking to you and that person looks to the side, that means if I was speaking in front of you, let's say one day there's the opportunity, I'm giving a public talk and you're there. And let's say you're watching me give the talk, if you suddenly ask me something and see my attention from its natural gaze direction, suddenly go to the left or go to the upper left or to the upper right or to the lower right, you know, those are different implications. That means you might not believe it, but for a lot of people, freedom is above. When you look at the sky, endless. When you look at the earth, limited. When you look at the sky, endless. When you look at the earth, limited. When there's light, endless manifestation. When there's darkness, nothing. When there's light, endless manifestation. When there's darkness, nothing. And how many times has this pattern of light on and off, of light hitting the earth? Our psychologies are designed to be evocational. I think we have to revolutionize our experience of time, and that will transform our access to history. We will realize what we are evoking in the moment and what is evoking us. And when you realize your unconscious mind is evoking your conscious, that would be a strange time where right now people are trying to take responsibility for what they don't know, like they're trying to take responsibility as the conscious mind for the unconscious, but the actual state where human beings are evolving to is they're going to be their unconscious taking responsibility for the conscious mind. That means you think you're the small and in the big. In the future, we're going to be the experience of the big and the small. We're going to be a collective being. Our minds are not material. The winds of evolution, how attention roamed the earth that it rose in meaning. The civilization, this mouse is out of control, guys. Imagine one day you see like like in the refrigerator, your computer mouse beside the cheese, and the cheese is like eaten into. That would be terrifying. By the way, Dan in the chat section, feel free to share your story on Listen. Interesting. Okay, so guys, I'm gonna say it to the listeners who don't have access to the chat section. Dan shared this interesting story that Ram Dass, evidently he was in Italy and he was maybe under the influence of on some psychedelic, and when he goes there, it seems like he gets a vision. Okay, all right, guys. Long story short, pretty much Dan is saying Ram Dass went to the Sistine Chapel under psychedelics, and he got a vision that as if Michelangelo is designing a sculpture, and in some sense, there's a rebellion going on, a protest against the Medici family, and so. So in some sense, Ram Dass, Michelangelo, of course, was alive way before Ram Dass. The Sistine Chapel is an old work. So Ram Dass felt he saw what took place in the Sistine Chapel. So there is this thing that when a person does become language, they begin experiencing how the world is living a life through them. Sometimes not everything that it comes into a person's awareness is for them. You know, and this is a strange concept for people. Maybe they might not, it may be something hard to embrace now, but it's this idea. It was in Shintoism, but strangely it's resurfacing in a modern way. Your eyes are not just your eyes. What that means is the moment, your whole moment is living a life simultaneously as there is the life of the archetype-based character. So there is moments where you may feel an experience that is happening, and this experience has no relevance to your identity. In those moments, watch the flow of the moment. You know, I'm telling you, there's this thing where my moment sometimes, some people are going to be like, what do you mean, Mr.Within? Imagine if your moment was a sphere, and imagine you're sitting with your friends on a couch. Now imagine there's a sphere around you, around the whole moment. Now imagine that sphere rolls out of the room and goes out from the hallway and goes somewhere else. And you're still sitting there, but something has left your moment. That means your attention is being pulled somewhere. It is the case that when someone doesn't know their value, if something else knows your value, they'll come to, in some sense, you to take advantage of the opportunity. You know? And what that really means is that here's the thing. We are reaching a point where language is being perceived to have a hollowness, and how the attention of the direct experience moves phenomena is suggesting the meaning. So and there is this idea, guys, there is this idea that memories aren't just in the brain. They are waves. They are energy patterns that are still echoing in the soul of the planet. Yeah, I've had moments, guys, where it was kind of mind-boggling after some point. I mean, it wasn't mind-boggling. You can kind of see it, how there's a life going on as waves. We're not alive as just particles. We're alive as waves too. I've had times where I've been literally thinking about something, and someone has come, and what they said to me was literally the finishing of a sentence. It was so surreal, guys, that moment, where it was as if I'm just like walking and I'm just hearing, like, how can I say it, like I'm thinking, that's my, your inner realms, like I'm just observing thought move in my inner realms, ideas move in my inner realms, as if like there's this dialogue. So I'm listening to this dialogue of my own thinking as I'm walking in the park, and suddenly somebody else comes and talks to me, and what they say is the rest of is still that inner dialogue finishing, right? There is something that many people who seek power don't consider. You see, any dimension, whether you are powerful or weak, there is solitude. Solitude is unignorable. You could be the most powerful and richest person on earth, and because you are that, you may feel you're alone. You're the only one. It's this whole thing of how sometimes certain intellectual mindsets can't socially integrate because their whole livelihood is dependent on the inner realms being meaningful all the time. A person who can't confront a moment of unknown, you can't really hold on to knowledge either. If you're not comfortable with the unknown, you will give up. You will give up. It's as if imagine you want to start some initiative, whatever it is, and someone says, "You're gonna fail, man," and you're gonna be like, "Okay, so what?" And then that person's like, "Whoa, this person's attention is moving for not the sake of the win-lose, is going for the sake of being an attempt to do that first thing." As much as you as a human being can follow a pattern that your ancestors did, you can also go out there in the world and create your own new pattern. The whole point of life is like the individual psychology is under the pressure of various gravitational fields. That means you're being pulled by your past sometimes, and stillness is the way. Do you know how many times I've tried something and my mind has made more reasons for me not to do something than to do something, and I realized if I stood there before the decision, my mind could make endless justifications till the end of time. This is why sometimes in life it can't be an articulation only. There's something too alive than just thought and concepts and measurement. There is something that's dynamic. In its dynamism, it is field-like. In its field-likeness, it is in some sense the movement of your own experience of conception through a river. What that means is, Mr. Within is pretty much telling human beings, your ideas are moving in a river of space. You are space moving the matter. The soul is moving the matter through space. You know what it feels like? This is what language feels like. This is how I perceive it, guys. Imagine the primitive human beings just finding if when you look at fashion, like the existence of fashion, that first time human beings attempted fashion, the dude saw a feather and put it in its hair. Put the feather in his hair or her hair. So it was a situation where it was like, just like how apes groom one another, human beings update one another. Okay? And so that updating went on to a point self-expression. I can't tell you, you might not believe it, but evolution was art. It was the new. Anything done new is creative technically. It's created anew. When Bill Gates made, the Windows, it was like, okay, new, oh my God. Thanks, man. You revolutionized the minds of the world. So the new, search for the new, become a hunter-gatherer of the new in your life. And the new doesn't mean forget the past. That means just because somebody explains the world in a certain way, that doesn't mean your eyes aren't there. The greatest realization of mysticism is that your eyes are there before anything else. When you realize that, you free yourself from ideological uh, uh, denial. There we go. You know, that means it's like somebody asks you, can you draw? And you as a person may be like, no, I can't draw. And then the person's like, why? And then you're like, I just can't. I know I can't. I don't have the skill of these artists. And then the person is like, have you tried drawing? And the person's like, no, because I'm not creative. And you see the belief that they are not something is causing them never to do something. When you realize you are not a creature of language, then the roars of attention are felt. The roars of an attention that is untouchable by form and by subject. When I remember I gave a talk, and I recommend people to listen to it. It was called When Subjects Become Your Subjects. Do you know how many esoteric stories I've heard of people trying to control beings from other dimensions? Control. Like the person doesn't want to just communicate, wants to control. And I was like, after some point, you'll realize those that you have leashed will break you, will tear you apart. In this life, any person who has kept something imprisoned that nature is commanding, as if, imagine Albert Einstein was about to go give a speech and somebody didn't let him. That is like, you see, it's as if nature is performing her own script, the Gaian mind is living its life, and human beings have also emerged in this Gaian field. Gaia is the Greek term for the planet. The world can be introduced in so many ways. Do you know every story that I share in these talks, I can share them in endless ways, endless contexts, endless characteristics? Because the animate, the purpose of the journey is a multidimensional exploration. That means people have forgotten that the coolest thing they have access to is that which is looking in the mirror. Your attention is your divinity. It's the only thing that's like, whoa, what is this? It's the stranger in our familiar universe. How free will moves. And really, it's a game of battle against ecosystem. That means when you kind of look at it, it's as if like many great philosophers who gave like political reviews and critiques, like, you don't understand, guys, storytelling was the only way certain writers could share certain deep ideas. That means sometimes when you go in history and read the type of short stories that people wrote, those short stories hold within them so much of a cultural and political reflection of the time. But you see, in our current day, we have focused on psychology and behavior. Because there was this massive emotion given to human beings, that of their own incompleteness and failure to be complete. This notion that you, who are alive once, it took you 4 billion years and all your ancestors miraculously surviving, for you to be here. You realize the value of life is in what it can do, not what it is only. That is why the word future exists. That means after everybody has come to the here and now, as the New Age community is trying to do, you know what happens when we come to the here and now? We see the world is how we look at it next. That means your karma is how you're looking at the world next. Not the next world. Because you see certain ideological systems, I was like, what is this? Every religion that I saw was a sort of weird escapism. I was like, what is this? The earth is an illusion, go get enlightened. This world is in God's will, go to heaven. Do you know? In some sense, if this world is a simulation from extraterrestrials, go find where the true nature of the being is. So eventually you see all of these are on some level saying, forget what's here now because you want to get there. But it's the balance we have to find as a species between the future and the now, not the future and the past. Because the past is technically past. Like, what can you do about what you did 10 years ago? You'd be like, nothing. Guys, when you realize subjects have as many viewpoints as you dare look into it, you'll realize that this knowledge that our civilization thinks it has is hovering in the void. For me, if you realize, you see, pretty much when a person speaks, they can speak about two things, really. They can speak about the changes of the concept in accordance to the context, or they can talk about the changes of the context. When I sometimes go and talk about a certain concept, you see, I'm telling you we're in the dual language is a dualistic technology. You know what that means? That means in modes of speech, we can be anything. Speech is evocation. Evocation is like you can spark that fire in any way. It doesn't matter if you use a bunch of rocks or if you use sticks or if it's lightning hitting a branch. Like, you see, it's a living thing. So I am saying, I'm pretty much speaking to all those people who realize the unknown is here first. That way we don't obsessively try to devour meanings in words. Because really, it's ink on a page. Right now, me speaking is sound in silence. That means whatever the listener hears, whose eyes are hearing it? Whose world is hearing it? You think the way I say these words is, you think me as the speaker can fathom how your mind will hear these sounds? Yes, the linguistic simulation is the idea that the world is a play of words. But beyond those words, that means human beings, the prototype for cyberspace culture is how we're experiencing the subjective virtualhood of language. Right now, as I'm speaking to you, I see myself physically existing in an objective realm. Okay? So that means just because I visualize this table in front of me that's brown to, for example, suddenly be blue, it's not. So I realize how far my inner realms have jurisdiction. And sometimes that jurisdiction amplifies when you find a moment that you realize your eyes are the design for. That means if the world moves first, you don't feel it's your turn. But when you move first, you feel it's your turn. And when you feel it's your turn, in some sense, it is in some sense an inner authorization of freedom for expression. It's as if, like, why is it that so many people, they start singing in the shower? Why in the shower? Because there is a freedom with their mind where it's invisible to the world. But believe it or not, I'll tell you, there was a time where I got very upset when I would lose some of these talks. In any great war, there's casualties, of course, but there would be times where I lost a bunch of these talks and it would make me upset. And then the logos asked me a question. And that question was, where do you think your voice is? Where do you think your voice is? The logos asked me that. My inner realms kind of projected that question forth. They threw it at me. And when that question hit me, I realized the mind is not an object. That means nothing is lost to the mind. The body has to just endure the roller coaster ride. The mind is free before it was born. It was free of any conception ever known. We are energy that's conscious of itself, are we not? If truth is limited to the inner realms, then everything everyone sees, we can assume at all times is true, you know? And if we just go based on the outer realms, we will be avoiding the inner realms. So we can say truth is the navigation of attention upon objectivity which evokes instantly subjectivity. That means look at some object in your room and tell me the instant reflective thought. So here's the thing, guys. We think light enters our eyes, right? But this light doesn't enter your eyes and stop. It reflects back as a subject. It's a declaration. Decisions are declarations. That means when a person decides, it's an all-in moment. It's an all-in subjective investment. It's kind of like me speaking right now and wondering as a human being how much of speech is my choice and how much of it is just how the environment has introduced itself to me. I feel language is moving towards a sort of transcendentalism. We have to build this. We need warriors per se only in this world. This world, the archetypes are battling it out, and there are certain archetypes that are realizing their time has passed or returning to the void. That means every human being should be considered an advanced communicator. Why? Because when we look at this earth, there's nothing more advanced than you. Maybe we may make super intelligence in 2050, but any technology for now is dependent on its user. For the true meaning of an AI or a system that doesn't require the human being to update, it means a reality where the technology no longer requires a user. The technology becomes its own user interface. So we are like biological creatures that became our own user interface. And I think what's happening is that what we think is time is our attention to form in our own linearized inner realm. I feel time doesn't exist for an atom. An atom doesn't wear a watch. The human form wears a watch. The human form entertains cultural programs. And so we are the evolutionary opportunity of biology to somehow be a subject to itself now, to subjectify itself, to consider its world and beyond. The word beyond is the most powerful word. That means any time you use the word beyond, you are technically pointing to the language threshold. You're pointing to meaning beyond language. So, dear human being, Mr. Within is saying this. Find a moment throughout the day or any moment or even before you sleep or whenever. Just find a moment where you wonder truly for yourself what you are. And if you feel the unknown, don't feel that you have to immediately box truth. Truth could be a process. It could totally not be a thing to hold or a thing to reach or a location. It could be an awareness to an activity, to what is happening in the moment. I was having a debate with someone, and our debate was, what is normality? Is normality just the democracy of cultural behavior at the time? Is it the majority's or the status quo's acceptance of what is valid? And I thought about it, and I'm like, the way people are behaving now. Do you know back in the day, if you were if you were in like early England, you were in London, if you didn't have a hat on, you weren't a man. If you didn't have a hat on, you wouldn't be a man. So right now, everybody who's not wearing a hat, if those people who wore top hats looked at us now, they'd be like, look at our descendants descending from our like evolved ways. Do you know what I mean? So what is like wearing hats is not wearing hats is normal now. But there was a time where if you didn't wear a hat, it wasn't normal. Do you see what I mean? So what is normality? It is just accepted behavior at that moment in history. That's what it is. And that can always change. That means technically, on paper, theoretically, if 8 billion beings could have their attention for one day for world peace, it would technically mean just the attention and the behavior of human beings needs to change, and the civilization becomes super advanced. Because the moment the behavior of the human being changes, they will see more new options in their moment. When your attitude towards something shifts, you see new dimensions instantly. That's why the Stoics realized the truth was, believe it or not, like your behavior and attitude is how consciously you're being a subject throughout the day. Your behavior is also how consciously, because it includes the body, how also you're being conscious you're an object throughout the day. So when someone speaks to me, I'm like, one thing I wonder often is like, how is this person seeing me as an object and as a subject, right? And sometimes you can totally see people who see you as an object, they don't care about the subjects. People who see you as a subject, they don't care about the object. And it's natural. It's just like the nature of the mind, we're evolving to a time where the subjective movement upon the objective is accelerating out of an ability to relate. We're literally experiencing life faster than matter. And that fastness, that acceleration of the advanced civilization into some sort of hyper-speed philosophy would in some sense mean the ultimate acceleration of the individual's potential. So that means imagine right now your most inefficient self. See your shadow self. And then imagine your most efficient self. That means you are envisioning the greatest self and the greatest and the weakest self. Your greatest self and your least greatest self. Imagine your chaotic self and ordered self in front of you. Now imagine that the chaotic self has a chaotic world, and imagine that the ordered self has an ordered world. Now imagine if the worlds were shift. If your chaotic self was in an ordered world, who would you be? And if your ordered self was in some sense in an ordered world, in a chaotic world, what would it be? You see, there's so many parallels. After some point, the emergence of individual consciousness is geometrical display. So guys, I think the most common, when we look at time, it's change, right? It's a change from various reference points. Reference points means that the point of view you refer to yourself as one in this space-time continuum. Right? Time is the fourth dimension. Why is it the fourth dimension? Because it is the only thing that distinguishes a sort of separateness between the same activity being done in the same space. Time is technically a hollow dimension. It is a reflection of the change of the universal sector. So imagine right now you're hearing Mr. Within speak. Now imagine while I'm speaking, the universe is speaking. And that you hear the voice of the universe experientially. The winds of evolution are moving our eyes, and it is the trust of the human being of their experiential evolution more than their ideological evolution. Your ideological evolution is instant. I'm not joking. You saw how in Transformers, like the person in the car was like, it offended the car, and the car suddenly looked at this new car that the movie had sponsored, and suddenly the car became that new update of the car. Your mind is literally like a transformer. You can literally see someone. I mean, inspiration for talent usually begins with any time you become aware of the great lineage of effort for any sort of craft that is accessible now, you get access to the craft, guys. Anything you want to learn, this may sound like a strange idea, guys, but honor the spirit of the idea's existence. One thing human beings don't realize is that the idea could be alive. But it doesn't mean you see the idea as alive. The idea to the human being appears as a projection. But what if the idea is a mask for an unknown movement? Like, guys, even we can say people in Manhattan had to wear hats when they named the place. Yeah. The winds of evolution also follows this idea that I developed in 2015-16. The idea was called the idea was called an evolutionary return to nature. And I was pretty much seeing the human civilization moving a technological direction where it's getting devoured by cyberspace culture. So what does that mean? That means we were animals in nature, and our imagination was the ecosystem. Like when a lion jumped at us, guess what? That was your imagination back in the day. Yeah. But now we have reached a point where our environment is defined based on the rules of our inner realms. That means technically law is an abstract form that must be respected. That means law is the bricks of the ideals of a society, the structure of a system. That means when you look at a system, if you consider the more it's living, the more conditional it is to its environment. The more the system isn't alive. For example, if you were speaking to an AI, or if you were speaking to some immortal alien, do you know what I mean? Like, that would be a totally different constitution of the ideological values of the moment. That means this is even there in negotiation. That negotiation is simply not you being aware of what it is that you seek in the moment, but also being aware of what else is sought by the other in the moment. So oftentimes human beings think it's like in regards to astral projection, New Age ideology, they just want to go fly in their wonderland. But it's not like that. It's a relationship where if you care for the unknown has to move. That means if you as a person are so bogged down in feeling that you know everything in a certain moment, guess what? Many things will change in that moment and you will miss out on it. Sometimes idolizing yourself through ideology is also ignorance. This is why I chose the name Mr. Within. There's no noun. I don't see myself as a noun. So I don't have noun problems, you know? I see myself as a verb, so I have verb problems, which at most is just how I'm directing my attention at the moment. We have to usher in a new era, because individual life is not as rewarding. Not as rewarding. Individual life has its limits. For how long, I haven't experienced this yet, but hopefully. You know, as ancients would say, the world is a place of dreams. It's not just those who seek reality. There's dreams that happen here. It's a world where certain simulations are possible. And so, for how long can you be a billionaire lying down on this glass, what do you call it? Harbor walk pathway. I don't know what to call it. Like this glass bridge, and you're lying down on this glass bridge, and you're in some sense experiencing the sun, you know? And for how long? You see, the mind requires evolution. Its evolution comes with interaction. Its interaction comes with how many minds there are in the room. That means, you tell me what is more exciting. Do you think it's exciting for, let's say you're an inventor right now, let's say there's 8 billion inventors. What is more exciting? A person inventing alone, or a person realizing a group of inventors inventing something bigger? So you see, man gets energized when he contributes to that which is bigger than themselves. This is why in many people's chaotic lives, religion was like this kind of bunker where their faith was just that because it's unknown, maybe it's going to work out. That maybe it's going to work out was the faith in a deeply rooted idea that there was another truth to the world than what was going to happen. We are creatures that now have to realize we're juggling objects, we're juggling subjects, we're juggling thought. It's not that we just move the vision of the world. The vision of the world moves us. Life needs to have unknown dimensions or you can't exist as an individual. If it's all known dimensions, you're not an individual. There's no growth anymore. Everything is known. If it's completely unknown, there never was anyone growing. So in some sense, us finding ourselves in a moment where we see the unknown and the known, and right now the civilization is working with what it knows. But there will come a time where there will be exhibitions of great minds in our civilization, children that will be born where they will take certain questions seriously. And those children will be the first ones to see the aftermath of the implementation of novelty. We are alive now. And on some level, you know what it feels like, guys? It feels like, I remember there was a time my mind managed to fathom to itself. It was as if like a soldier in World War II beside a campfire, just looking at the fire and reminiscing. I just imagined like I could look through the eyes of that character for a moment in my inner realms. And I remember I was looking and it was so vivid and clear. It was like I was reliving a memory I had visualized. And so in that incident, it was a situation where I suddenly felt this bullet. I felt this bullet just pierce. And it was suddenly, it was a sort of recognition that a system is not designed to be eternal if it grows. That means on some level, our evolution and growth is defined by change. That means your identity is what you're changing into, not just how you've changed so far. So you see, there's this argument can be made that no human being can judge any other human being simply because their eyes are inaccessible to each other. It's just like this, guys. You gotta find your morality has to be standing in a better world if you are to advance. That means we have to, for some time, there's going to be this fearless mentality where civilization is not advanced, but behind our eyes we can see it breathe in an advanced way. The minds of people are being wasted in the silence of a lack of inspiration for the collective. A new ethos must emerge. It's no longer a time for external rebellion. External rebellion has become meaningless the moment we identified ourselves with the accumulation of information. Right now, it's pretty much, you can kind of say, for me, the explorer is the ultimate archetype in the educational system. That means that's the certificate. It's endless. The pursuit and advancement of your civilization is endless. The civilization is this thing that has been left here. It's a science project, 4 billion year old science project, and people are like, I don't know if I should touch this science project. It's like, at least see what it is. I feel when a person runs towards their true vision, you start hearing drums. You know how in battle, when the war is beginning, it's like you hear drums. These drums that chaos is marching, chaos is here, potential. Because when the person is in battle and in war, it's known against unknown. It's literally the ninja identifying with the light or the shadow. If it feels it cannot survive in the light, it goes into the shadow. That means the most ninjas, you can say more samurais perhaps died because of their honor, and more ninjas lived because they didn't have honor. That's the thing. The ninja's tactic was deception. The samurai's tactic was like, I stand as my own value. The samurai was like a tank. The ninja was like a sniper rifle. The sniper rifle, you never see where it's coming. And there is that potential. This world can move in many ways. Right now, a meteor can hit. Can you just fathom this idea? Like, a meteor can just hit Earth? Like, right, after some point, you realize there's so many chaotic things that can happen that it's like, you realize it's just about enduring and the eyes perceiving. That means if your attention is on life, you live here. The world, you can't, you don't get pushed by the winds of selfish claim. There's nothing to claim in this void. That means ownership is abstract. It's like this. Imagine this story, guys. This happy kid comes home and his parents are like, oh, hey, son, why are you so happy? And the son's like, I realized today I own the world. And the parents were like, what? The parents were like, what do you mean, son? What do you mean you own the world? And then the son is like, the son looks at the parents and he's like, I realized that when I own my toy, it's an abstract thing. So the ownership of the world is abstract, so I can own anything. And then the parents are like, whoa. Is ownership abstract? How much of our civilization is built based on our attention to it, and how much of it is built based on the ecosystem defining the creature? It is time for the inner rebellion. It is time for the members of civilization to give themselves the greatest service. That means it's like when you forget the unknown, you think you have to know it all. Because if you really don't pursue anything, like let's say it like this, human beings on this earth, they're all like either velocity or they're just speed. What does that mean? The difference between velocity and speed is direction, right? That means some people on this planet, they're moving, everybody has speed, but some people give a direction to their speed. Some people don't. And those people who don't, they may feel comfortable because the less weight you carry, of course you feel more relaxed, but the less life you see. This is why in the Sufi culture, they had this story where the idea of the pearl was the concept of enlightenment. And anybody they thought they were enlightened back in the day, the Sufis would say that person has the pearl. Go talk to that guy, you know. So it would be that kind of situation. So they would say the one who has the pearl, who truly has the pearl, is not the one who's got the pearl in the mountains alone in their solitude. It is the one who holds the pearl and still walks in the market. There is this story. There is this guru in India. There is this sacred temple. The disciples and the guru are in some devotional attention practice or something. Suddenly, the doors of the temple open, a man storms in. And this man's mode and tonality of speech was in some sense with a strange authority, as if he was like some wealthy or powerful guy in the world, and he just stormed in and he's like, "You're an enlightened guru. Give me the enlightened mantra. Enlighten me right now." As if he was like, imagine a general on a battlefield, like wanting to find enlightenment. He's commanding it from his world. As if enlightenment! Enlightenment runs from the back of the army, you know. Yes, sir! This man says, "Give me the mantra. Give me the ultimate mantra." And the moment is so strange, and in a strange way synchronistic or something, that this guru looks at him and says, "No, you're too hostile. You're too intense. You're too intense for this. You're too savage. You're not ready for a mantra." And then the guy says, "No, if you're enlightened," and the guy has a ridiculous authoritative persistence that the guy suddenly feels as if, like the yogi, the guru for a second says like, "Okay, maybe this guy needs, maybe it's his time." Yeah. And the guru gives the guy a mantra. And the guy goes into this room and for a week just like it's like mantra after, you know, whatever the mantra was. Om Namah Shivaya or something, you know. The guy's just intensely saying it. After a week, the disciples would go give him food or something, but the guy was just so preoccupied with mantras, it was as if the person was a general. He was as intensely as that wanting to, in some sense, go and get the enlightenment. He wanted to be victorious more than he wanted to lose. After a week, he comes out. The disciples and the guru look at him, and the disciples look at him and they see a strange glow. Something has changed. This guy did something with the mantra. Something has transformed. And the guru looks at him, but the guru's intuition, in some sense, you know, updates, and the guru realizes there's something off. And the guy comes up to the guru and the disciples, and he says, "I see Brahman in you, and you, and you," like a politician who's, you know, and you, and it's for you, and you, and you. So in some sense, the guy intensely says, "I see Brahman in all. It is done." He says, "I see the presence of God in all." The guru is not assured. The guru gives the man a bag. The man holds the bag. And the guru tells him, "Go and get vegetables." And the man is like, "Brahman is asking me to get vegetables, okay?" The guy has become calm and gentle. He's accepted some strange equanimity through an equal vision behind his eyes. That's when you become gentle, by the way. If you're still playing the value game with other creatures in the world where you don't have their eyes, you'll never be content. It's a ripple on your own mind's pond. The man goes to get the vegetables. the man finds himself going to town. And as he's going to town, he sees a bird land on a branch, and he says, I see Brahman. He sees the tree, he's like, I see Brahman in the tree too. People walk by, he's like, I see Brahman in them. And he's going there, it's as if he's experiencing this elevated ego by feeling he's seen the ultimate oneness. And he goes in, and suddenly he sees, when he gets close to the vegetable market, everybody running from the vegetable market. Even the vegetable owners are like, they're like, okay, fuck these vegetables, you know. There's a crazy elephant in the market, and there was this wild elephant in the vegetable market, and everybody was running away. But this guy, he feels he's enlightened, and as he's going, he's like, why are they running away from Brahman? And suddenly this guy runs up to him and he taps him on the shoulder and he's like, hey man, what are you doing? Don't go to the vegetable market. There's a crazy elephant. There's a wild elephant. Like this elephant that's been enslaved and suddenly it's had enough. You know, it's like, don't go to the market, you know? The guy says, don't worry, young man. I see Brahman everywhere. Brahman is with me. And the guy's like, bro, you're bringing metaphysics right now? The guy runs it, you know? And the guy's like, all right, let's go see. I'm enlightened. And the guy has this intense attitude. You can see how the ego for a second wiped its own face only to see the mask was still on. So what happens is the guy goes into the market and he sees the elephant in the distance and he in some sense bows and he says, I see Brahman in this elephant. And he goes slowly, gets the vegetables, you know, and puts the money on the counter of the vegetable stands. And he even, as he picks up the vegetable, the wild elephant is there. And as he picks up the vegetable, he's looking at it and he's like, I see Brahman in this apple. And then, to his surprise, he sees the elephant is walking towards him. The elephant has noticed. He's like, what is this guy doing here? You know, this is my land. The guy suddenly grabs the bag and feels this eeriness, and as he's walking, suddenly the elephant comes close and stops right in front of him as he's almost made his way to kind of leave the vegetable market. And he just turns around and looks at the elephant, and the elephant walks closer, you know? And he looks at the elephant and he says, I see Brahman in you. And the elephant looks at him and says, I don't see Brahman in you. And the elephant grabs him and injures him and throws him to the side, and he's just there shocked. He's like, what? Why Brahman? You know, the guy's in shock. And the guy quickly, people come, there's people around there, you know, invisible angels, and they kind of help the guy. And they help him and they take him to the hospital, and the next day, the guru, at that point, the disciples of the guru was like, there's no vegetables, what is this? Like, it's like we at least expect an enlightened guy to get vegetables, you know? And so the guru sends the disciples check it out, the disciples stay overnight with the guy, and the next day as they're bringing him back to the temple to see what happened, you know? The guy is angry, as if that enlightenment for that week was just a vacation. And the guy is his old self, and he's like, you don't work, you're a charlatan. What is this? You're not an enlightened master, you know, what is this, you know? And the guru's like, relax, man, tell us what happened. And the guy calms down and he tells the guru the story. And he tells the guy he saw Brahman, and the guy told him don't go to the market, and he's like, I see Brahman, why shouldn't I go in the market? And the guy went in the market, and he's like, he's Brahman, he felt God was there with him. Then the elephant like slammed him, you know. And that was a situation where the elephant, of course, you know, it's still an animal. That means it's reacting to its biological environment before it's reacting to its conscious or other environment. You know, human beings have that privilege. Most animals, if they do, it's like a miraculous moment in an animal's life. You know, this is why human beings, we're right now, it's kind of messed up. We're eating animals, but like there should be a time where we find some other solution to our food and we start communicating with animals. That means those human beings, pet owners, don't realize they are technically evolving the life of the thing. But there are also bad pet owners, guys, you know? There's, I'm telling you, don't get a pet if you can't take care of the freedom of their mind, you know? That means pretty much don't be responsible for anything you don't care about, you know? That means don't even I don't know. This is a viewpoint, of course. But anyways, guys, I'll get to the story. The guru says, so you're telling me you saw Brahman in the bird on the tree. You saw Brahman in the vegetables, the elephant, the whole moment, but you didn't see Brahman in the guy that told you don't go to the market? And the guy's like, oh snap. And you see, guys, nothing clears the stormy skies of anger better than clarity. Clarity means space to be. That means when you realize it's okay for existence to happen, then you really can't judge it. It's just happening, you know? You know, there's this intense story. I just remembered it. It's the story of this prostitute and this priest. And it's this old story. I saw it on some website, but the story had a kind of mystical moral value. So that's why I'm sharing it. So there's this priest who the house is right, the temple, strangely beside it, there's a prostitution place. And so this priest, from his window of his room, you know, he would see the room of this prostitution building. This is an ancient story. And in that building, there was a girl, there was a woman, like a prostitute who, in some sense, she would, in some sense, at the end of her day, come there and she would only pray in front of a mirror. Can you imagine that life, where in the morning you are like a prostitute, at night you're just praying for some sort of decency in the world, you know? And so it's intense. So anyways, guys, in the story what happens is that a lifetime goes by and this priest is doing devout, activities, staying true to the values, going exactly by the divine script, acting in accordance to the divine script, And so every day, but the priest every day would come home, like I go to his room and just look at this prostitute who would just be praying, And a lifetime passes by, and the story says both of these characters find themselves at Heaven's Gate. And there's this moment where the priest is about to walk into Heaven's Gate and some force doesn't let him, as if he can't enter. And there's a force that suddenly the prostitute, the lady who was there, in some sense, she is allowed access into heaven. And so this priest goes into this frenzy and he shouts at the voice at the gates of the divine. And the guy says, I have lived my whole life preaching God, acting as God wanted. Why? Why am I not denied access into this heaven? Why is she who her whole life she was in filth, why is she allowed in heaven? And then the voice shouts the lesson that should have been there before the lifetime. That you acted good, but your attention was on the bad. Your attention was not on the source. But she was in hell, but she saw heaven's light. Sorry guys, I got a bit emotional there. For the tears of chaos and order evaporate into the designs of an advanced civilization. That is Mr. Within's attempt. Realize you're alive now, not in what you will receive or get or where you will be. That is another moment. Art is how your inner realms are more free than your outer realms. Skill is how your inner realms are more free than the outer realms. If your inner realms are not more free than the outer realms, then the outer realms is defining your archetypal spectrum of being. And that's a choice. So, right now I can choose to totally forget my own eyes and just think that the world is happening in one way. This is why I'm saying I'm honoring Buckminster Fuller's God verb and the Whiteheadian process. And I am saying we are pilots. We are attention of form moving in fields of being. And life has its challenges, guys. You know what it is? I would say this would be a kind of, you can say, contribution to modern mythology. That human beings were no longer in worlds where gods existed. Because they had found, whether technologically or through the technology of language, elevate themselves to a point that they felt they were the gods of their free will. That means, right now, if we were going to study the intelligence of an object like a cup, like this cup is being picked up by a hand and it's moved. The cup technically moved, but what moved it was not the cup. And it's kind of like, technically, when we live as individuals, our thoughts move. We think we're our thoughts, but it's not the thought moving the thought. That on some level there's the pure presence of energy just conscious of itself. Our roots are beyond our linguistic conceptions. Do you know what that means? That means language is a veil. It's just a translation. It's an image inside a changing image. It's a static image inside a changing image. There we go. It's a frame of a film. Language is a frame of an inner film. Perfect. Words are frames of inner films. We have to not just build a civilization that values art, but we gotta also build a civilization that is trying to penetrate the deepest secrets of the mystery of man's eyes, that we are alive now and we have denied ourselves the macrocosm by thinking we are the microcosm. The value of the process is integrative. That means right now you can identify as separate as you want. Do you know you can even feel, you can even not believe your own ideas. But you will eventually see, regardless of the belief system, thoughts come and go, it is the attention that remains. Memory's center of gravity is how the attention is being in the moment. Study your attention and you're already living in an advanced civilization. So anyways, guys, I'm going to end the talk here. The winds of evolution is just the inspiration that there is intelligence, or as Terence McKenna, the scholar, would say, there's another tenant in the room. Mr. Within is saying that tenant in the room is the realization that human beings, behind their eyes, are like rivers moving the leaf, but in front of their eyes, they think the leaf is projecting the river. Mr. Within wants to see a renaissance of skill, a renaissance of caring for the mysteries of the mind to occur. People have to, Diogenes, Friedrich Nietzsche, this German philosopher, when he spoke about Diogenes, he kind of animated Diogenes with a lantern running into the streets in the middle of the day, and people were like, Diogenes, Diogenes was a great philosopher, guys, but he was also a cynic and a bit savage in society. A bit of a savage in society. And so Diogenes was running around with this lit lantern, and people were like, Diogenes, what is this? What are you doing? Why are you wasting light in the day? And Diogenes shouted and he said, I'm looking for an honest man. And that's pretty much after you have lived many ways of life, you've played many games on this planet, you will eventually look for that, not an honest man, for an honest world. The world that in some sense your mind has welcomed first before you have welcomed, because before the world has welcomed. That's when the sense of belonging is there. Pretty much, I think we've all seen, like, kind of a peak evolution of the individual. And I think we will eventually get bored and we would want to see the peak evolution of the collective activity. It's kind of seeing like a bird fly in so many different ways, then seeing that bird fly among other birds in a unique wave formation, and then you're like, as if it's like all those birds are tuning into the same wave, same rhythm. And so when you realize there's rhythms in this life, it's a concept that's technically beyond a concept. It means it's the oscillation between two dimensions. That means sometimes it's because the inner realms are evocational, because we blink, that's kind of like world here, world not here, world here, world not here. So when we experience the unknown, it would be like unknown here, unknown not here, unknown here, unknown not here. You know? It's a sort of attention, and the attention to the inner space defining itself, in some sense designing itself, for mankind not to forget the voice of the bodhisattvas of the world. That after you climb the mountain of individual salvation, you will discover that you will hear the cries of your world. And when you hear the cries of your world, it becomes a sort of just movement. That's what I want to see. I want to see some new rhythm, a new pattern echoing in the vision of civilization, where everybody has come to the fascination of the one looking through their eyes. and where the bounds and the edges of the meaning of that is. Because I'm telling you, it's people think communication is just sharing words. No, it's not just sequencing of imagery even. Communication is rhythmic allowance. So on some level, the difference we can say between how would I say it, like the birth of the awareness to light and darkness was our psychological evolution, guys. And when you realize that you're starting off from that duality and wondering about your inner realms, then it becomes the winds of evolution have to become a trust. A fish in a current can literally do nothing other than trust or go against the current. So certain times when I feel minds are giving off waves, I feel every person's mind is a manifestation of a field. Like, I cannot, I honor Rene Descartes by realizing that the concept of the mind-body dualism has an incredible value now in this modern time. The world is also being sculpted by our decisions, is it not? The meaning of your life is being sculpted by where your attention is. Do you know there was a time, I think this happens when a person gets caught in their inner realms and suddenly after years wakes up from that inner realms and gets this sense of regret of how they had blindfolded themselves out of the meaning of a dynamic moment. You know? So if somebody asked you what's the best kind of civilization, we'd wonder probably an ever-advancing one. And when we look at what that would mean, that would be as like, think of it this way, it's like they speak about this in business. Right now, most people should realize there's like another contribution for the inner realms is that there is a digital marketplace nowadays. That means your ancestors, if they were merchants, they were just selling to the people who came by their store. Now the internet has created a global audience. Pretty much, the internet is the technology that mastered the teleportation of thought, the teleportation of idea and image. So technically, we've actually built a teleportation technology, but it's for our inner, like, imagery, and like we can teleport like an image over the internet. You know what I mean? Technically, the internet is the pioneer of teleportation technology on some weird way. But anyways. It's a very big question, guys. I'm not trying to talk about it as if like here's the answer. I'm saying like this is as far as I see of the situation. It's like this Rubik's cube that can only be solved by 8 billion people participating and caring to solve it, right? So it's like sometimes people think just because life puzzles them, they think they're inevitable suffering states. I mean, yeah, there is a suffering. We're all temporary physically, and if you just look at life, you're changing all the time. Even the cells of the body change every 2 weeks. So life is technically biological change. It's like the only eternal thing in this life is change, maybe. If we fear deviating from what is happening now or this current system, we never experience a new system. If you never dare to do something new, literally your character as a human being doesn't grow. Did you know that? This is why most people will realize, this is Mr. Within's observation, that really the tension between a people in the world is not based on just their ideological systems. That means it's like immigration. I mean, it's realistic. It's a common sense thing to see, actually. Like, as if we live only in a two-dimensional plane, like Mr. Within is suggesting, we build sky cities. The solution to overpopulation is not getting rid of humans, is creating space for them. And we can access a three-dimensional space, you know? Human beings taking turns living in sky cities, you know? Because that's the evolution of a city, right? We're looking at our city, it's on the earth. If anything happens to the surface of the earth, pretty much our city breaks. So we are right now living strangely in cities made of glass because the earth is defining their stability. But if we make intelligent cities that can lift into the sky, there's great revolutionary movements that can come. So anyways, guys, I'll officially open it up to the Q&A. The talk's over. If anybody has a question, perfect time to ask. You know, my attention's all on these ideas now. So there's the... The winds of evolution are inseparable from nature's ultimate voice, that all is an expression, that everything you have seen in your moment of being is in some sense emanating, your whole moment of being is covering it. Your mind is here, dear being. Your mind is here. Now this mind that is here is in some sense pretty much the decision of whether it's collective or individual, you know. Right now you have to be an individual for survival reasons, but in the future, if there's creative spaces that emerge, human beings may find themselves on what I would call prototype heavens. That means right now human speech and communication, it has certain frictions, but these frictions in a more advanced system, kind of like how Elon Musk is designing the Hyperloop, like that's pretty much like the best way. Because guys, I'm telling you, I recommend people not to use subways. I'm telling you, if you have to use it, find some sort of other way to work. Because I'm telling you, this constant being in a constant, like I remember for 1 year, guys. Like, you know, can you blame me when I talk about an advanced civilization after? Like, let me tell you the story. Like for 1 year, every day I would go into the subway and it would go through what felt like 24, I think it was 24 spots, 24 stations, and it would be like so many moments of just stopping. So as if going at a fast speed, stopping, going at a fast speed. That means if your brain, if you held a jar in the subway, the liquid in the jar would suddenly be still and then move very fast and then suddenly come to an abrupt stop, then move very fast. So it's like if your brain, if you treat your brain as like a jar for your, if you treat your skull as a jar for your brain, you know, in some sense the neurochemistry, you can even say, of the brain is moving. Like it's so unhealthy for the mind, the subway. It's advanced technology, you know. I got to give credit to the designers. It's like, you know, high five as an engineer, but in regards to actual health long term, I think it's the destruction. It's literally causing more injuries. It's not worth the journey. And hyperloop is the best solution. That means in the hyperloop, because the thing is not touching anything and it's not stopping, there's per se only one abrupt stop. It's always fascinating to see the future generations of chimps in some sense wearing suits and ties and going to work in giant metal capsules. Like on some level, yeah, that's pretty advanced. But on another level, it's not practical. And so we must design a blueprint to civilization. That means after you're done living for yourself, you'll find this strange strength. Uh, it's kind of like a feeling, like you feel like, imagine, like most people right now, they're identifying with their inner realms. But when your inner realms look at the outer realms, they identify with the progress of the world. So the Bodhisattva was here to enlighten the world, the Buddha was here to enlighten the self. And hilariously, the concept of enlightenment was beyond the language threshold. So technically, enlightenment is not for a person because it moves beyond the conception of a person. It's all about redesigning relationships with the world and every person's eyes. Guys, we can't ignore, even in Darwinian thought, that this creature wants to survive, and ultimately that survival means the survival of the mind that's moving the body. Right now we're in a world, or the mainstream even acknowledges this, that people have minds. Now the mind is not an object. If imagine you go to a job interview and the guy's like, put your mind on the table, I want to see what your mind looks like. And then the person's like, what do you mean put my mind on the table, you know? Because the mind is not an object. And when the mind is not an object, it's a subjective space where the free will is dictating its movement. That means I'm telling you, we are not just our past. Even though there's certain habits that echo, that means we are existing in a biological program. That means if suddenly I get super cold and, like, let's say the window suddenly is like, I don't want to be closed anymore, and the window opens itself and it gets super cold, like at a certain physical conditional level, I will stop to talk, for example. The whole projection of the purpose in that moment just is set on hold because the conditions of attention have come to maintain the biological program. The biological program, I mean, I'm not saying everybody should have this view, but it's just sometimes I see that if when you look at what a vehicle is, it's something you move, isn't it? You move in. And so we can say matter is a vehicle for attention and the driver is space. Space is alive. You know, scientists are like, okay, that's too meta, man. You know, too meta for civilization right now. You know, space is alive. I mean, you can totally say, like some people they thought their soul was in their body. Some people thought their soul was the space. I mean, it's a common idea. Anytime an idea steps out into the world, it's parallel reverse reflections also apply. That means Mr. Within would say this world, it doesn't have just laws in regards to like gravitation or whatnot, or laws of thermodynamics. Well, what the laws it has is also behavioral. That means it's not the behavior, the phenomenology in the moment is not inspired per se out of an awareness to linear meaning. It's just an occurrence. So it's like the whole task of the human mind is that throughout the day, what is it that, like those people who are, let's say, violent, you're violent because you are treating a living being as an object. Literally. You know what I mean? That means it's like, just like how a person can grab a cup and slam that cup to the ground, in some sense, violence can you destroy something that has took a while to be built. What if that cup was ordered from Amazon and that cup took maybe like, 2 months to arrive, like breaking that cup is too intense. You don't break a cup of a man who's been waiting 2 months to get that cup. So you see, violence after some point is just not efficient activity. It doesn't mean the energy expression is inefficient. That means it's like we have to create systems, and most likely I think violent people should be people who try cyberspace simulations. They should become the pioneers of human experience in cyberspace. Because let me tell you, it's all about intensity. That means you think about it, so many people are motivating kids towards sports, really? You think all kids want to dress a certain way and play a certain way? No. The mind of man is free. That means we are treating athletics and we're treating the educational system in some sense not as evolutionary opportunities, because we're defining the game rather than having the new people who enter the system define the game, explore and advance the edges of the system. Do you know how many people, when the teacher is speaking, in some sense are having opinions on what the teacher is saying? And it's those opinions that is the collective shift. It is the roar of the mind in space and time. As something where somebody asked Plato, it's like, what time is it, man? Plato was like, time, and he realized he doesn't have, like, watches haven't been invented yet, and he's like, Plato's like, why am I just looking at my wrist for no reason? And Plato looks at the guy and he says, time is the moving image of eternity, buddy. What can you really ask me? So if you're a philosopher and people ask you a question, you can totally, of course, destroy the question. Life is a movement. It's a movement that we have become conscious of. So we start from our inner realms, we become aware of the outer realms, we live for the outer realms, we tap into collective rhythms, many rivers find the ocean, and eventually we discover the ultimate vision. Because you can't have a lot of attention pointed to one point. Do you know how many people are living for the future right now? I mean, we can say some people in this, like, let's say we were having an extraterrestrial analysis from an aerial view of terrestrial beings, of human beings. And we saw all human behavior, happening on this planet. Now, some of this human behavior, the human being, that when they wake up in the morning, they are inspired by their past. So that means some people, aside from their biological eyes maneuvering and navigating throughout the day, their mind's eyes are either on the past, either are on the future, or they're just present in the moment. So I'm saying the percentage of that is that right now the reason it's slow, the advancement of civilization, is because most human beings, they feel judged by their past, not realizing it has all passed them by already. What can you do about a fire that has already burnt out? What can you do with the ashes, That means, what is it better? To worship the ashes of a fire that that was extinguished? Or would you say, is it better to find a new way to create fire, or is it better to worship the ashes? You see, of course. So Aziz, in the chat section, I'm going to encourage you to attempt right now to sculpt a question out of um, what it is that you're wondering about in regards to impermanence and evolution. Just in some sense, envision a new question and ask, and I'll answer, because I don't have a very clear view of what you're asking me. It's honestly like, you need space to move, you need a mind to live. Somebody came to Rama, this god, in this Indian god, archetype of the perfect man, in Vedic times, and they came to Rama, and the guy's like, Rama, why do we gotta work as human beings? Like, why the gods giving us a break? What is this? What is this celestial, um, kinda, communist desire? You know what it was? Rama looked at that guy and said, you don't understand. This world is an opportunity. Human life is not, you're not in some sort of imprisoned planet of suffering, and you're not in some sort of everything is your own creation kind of world. You are in, literally, Rama told that guy that the gods in higher dimensions above on Mount Manu, they in some sense are getting so many offerings. They are creatures of pure mind. That means, because they're creatures of pure mind, they don't have any question to ask. So the gods are so busy getting offerings, they don't have any questions. And the creatures beyond, in lesser dimensions than the human beings, they can't ask the question. They're too lost to their chaotic nature to be able to ask the question. So it is only in human life where the mystery can be engaged. That is the value of life. Because on some level, I mean, it's a choice between, when I give these talks, the reason I'm saying people should care to share their inner realms now more than ever in the era of advanced communication, it's like, you don't understand. Our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, and right now we have to be hunter-gatherers of the evolution of psychology beyond how far language studies have taken us. We are no longer standing on thin ice, because the roar of the lion has broken the frozen truth. And it's fascinating sometimes. I look at this world and I'm like, oh my God. Like, we're considering that we were like the descendant, like a chimp plus some other descendant we don't know about. This is how far evolutionary biology has gone. Where there are evolutionary descendants, it's like half chimp, half something we don't know. So we have, strangely, human evolution is a story of one parent not being in the picture. That's why it's like we're kind of unique. So, what does that mean? That means the person could have wondered, why apes? Why chimps? Why not lions? Why is it that when we walk in the street we don't see the evolved, years of evolved evolutionary faces of lions? Imagine humanized lion faces. Do you know? So why is it that the chimp got that privilege? Why not the other species? So there was some unique incident. I think every person who looks at history is like, yeah, something happened. Something happened somewhere. They told this history professor that was angry. They told this history professor, why are you angry? He's like, because I just realized my whole career is based on some person's story. What can you do? Historians are the comedians of truth, you know. I'm joking, guys. History has a noble. The scribes have their own divinity, but I'm just saying, you know. Guys, I have this excitement right now. If anybody has a mystical question, please ask. You know, like I'm curious to see what can be seen from the lighthouse of the conscious mind that seems to be arriving from the edge of the ocean. You know. Anyways, guys, I'm actually kind of feeling like, you know, let's land this talk. So, anyways, thanks for everyone for listening, and trust your mind, because I don't know what other way we have as creatures to evolve our mind. You know, we gotta trust something and move forward. You know. So, anyways, much blessings and all saying.